Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'll be making an 1860s corset. The pattern I'm using is Redthreaded's 1860s Gored Corset. I really enjoyed this pattern. Has a great sizing system, and I didn't have to make a lot of alterations in order to get it to fit my body. I'm also excited about this corset because it is the first time I'll be using silk satin. Enjoy the rest of the video. The first step in making this corset is cutting out the strength layer, for which I chose a cotton coutil. I also cut out the fashion layer, for which I chose a pink silk satin. Here you see me using a pencil and ruler to transfer the boning channel placement from the pattern to my pieces. Here is what all the pieces look like laid out. You see that I chose to cut the fashion layer slightly larger to make the pieces easier to maneuver. The excess will be trimmed off later. Now the first step in assembly is to insert the busk. Here you see me marking the placement for the loop side of the busk. It was sewn using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Whenever I reached my mark, which indicated a loop of the busk, I would simply stop, backstitch, then jump to the next mark, then continue. The seam was then ironed open and the loop part of the busk inserted. I then stitched close to the busk by machine using a zipper foot, which sandwiches the busk in place. Wait, we need to back up just a bit. Before I stitched the busk in place, I realized I needed to attach the waist tape. The waist tape is a piece of Peterson ribbon that helps reduce the strain of the corset in the waist area. Now it was time to move on to the stud, or left side of the busk. I used the right side of the busk to mark the placement of the studs. I then used an awl to pierce the fabric. After the holes were pierced, I inserted the stud side of the busk. I then positioned the waist tape and secured the placement of the busk using clips and secured it by machine using a zipper foot. And with that, the busk arguably the hardest part of making a corset, was complete. I then finished all the other edges of the corset using my serger, and all the excess fashion fabric was trimmed away. Now it was time to insert the bust gores. I first slashed the panel, then carefully ironed back the scant 1/8 of an inch seam allowance thoroughly. I then inserted the gores and pinned them in place. They were then top stitched by machine, getting as close to the edge as possible. Here is a close-up of the bust gores. And here is how the corset looks after the bust gores have been inserted. Now that the busk and bust gores have been inserted, the rest of the assembly process can begin. The fronts were clipped to the sides and sewn. Here you see me placing the tapes for the boning channels. I am using a 1/2 of an inch cotton tape for this. I am pinning them in place over the waist tape to secure it in place. And here is how it looks finished. Now I attach the hip gore using, again, wonder clips, making sure to match notches. I then sew everything together by machine using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I am attaching another set of tapes for boning channels. These channels continue into the hip gore, which is why they had to be sewn after it was attached. Here is how it looks finished. Now I attach the sides to the backs of the corset and place more cotton tapes for the bones that straddle the grommets. Here is the corset after all the gores and bony channels have been sewn. Now it is time to bind the corset. I cut out 1 inch wide bias strips of the silk and then iron them using a bias tape maker. I then bound the corset starting with the center back. The bias tape was pinned right sides to right sides, sewn on by machine, and the excess trimmed and turned under. It was then finished by hand, which you see me doing here. I then bound the bottom edge of the corset in a similar manner. Now it was time to bone the corset, for which I chose a mix of 6mm and 7mm synthetic whalebone, which mimics the properties of actual baleen, which is the boning of choice in the period. For the bones in the back panel though, I used a 1/4 inch straight seal for added strength. The ends of each bone were filed prior to insertion. With the bones inserted, I could bind the top edge of the corset. Now it was time to insert the grommets. I first punched out the holes for them using a rubber mallet, a block of wood, and a 0.0mm die. I then used this press I got on eBay to set them. I used size 0.0mm grommets for this corset. With that done, the corset was wearable. But who wants a wearable corset when you can have a decorative one? I trimmed the top edge of the corset using this cotton lace I got from Trim 2000 in the LA Fabric District. I attached the lace by hand using whip stitches. The final step was to floss the corset. I am putting a card above to a much more helpful tutorial than I'm about to try to give you, so please check out her video. I start at the lower right of the bone and then move in a diagonal direction to the top left of the bone, marked by my pin. Go back under in that same hole and do that 3 times. Then I go under the corset to the top right of the bone, then move diagonally to the bottom left of the bone, and do that 3 times, then tie off. Here is how it looks flossed. The reason you floss your bones is to hold them in place in their channels and help them not poke through your fashion layer. I use 3 strands of cotton embroidery floss to floss my corset. With the corset complete, the last thing that needed to be done was to lace it. I used a simple white cotton lacing cord. I started at the top, then went under each grommet in an alternating pattern until I reached the 2 waist grommets. Using the same side of the cord, I went under the next grommet on the same side of the corset, creating a loop. This is called the bunny ear method. When you put on the corset and fasten the busk, you simply need to pull on the loop, which are positioned at the waist, in order to tighten the corset. I then tied off the cord at the end using a square knot.